Russia suspends U.S. arms treaty. Watch this space. According to popsci.com, Putin is backing away from New START. Here's what that nuclear treaty does. The agreement between the U.S. and Russia caps how many nuclear weapons each country can deploy. Today, President Vladimir Putin of Russia announced that the country would suspend participation in New START, the last standing major arms control treaty between the country and the United States. Putin clarified that the suspension was not a withdrawal, but the suspension itself represents a clear deterioration of trust and nuclear stability between the countries with the world's two largest nuclear arsenals. Putin's remarks precede by a few days, the anniversary of the country's invasion of Ukraine, an entirely chosen war that has seen some concrete Russian gains, while many of Russia's biggest advances have been repulsed and overtaken. At present, much of the fighting is in the form of grinding static warfare along trenches and defended positions in Ukraine's east. It's a kind of warfare akin to the bloody fronts of World War I through the presence of drones and long-range precision artillery, lending it an undeniably modern character. Those modern weapons and the coming influx of heavy tanks from the U.S. and other countries to Ukraine put Putin's remarks in some more immediate context. While New START, specifically an agreement between the United States and Russia over nuclear arsenals, the decision to suspend participation comes against the backdrop of the entirely conventional war being fought by Russia against Ukraine, with U.S. weapons bolstering the Ukrainian war effort. A follow-up statement from Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs clarified that the country would still notify the U.S. about any launches of intercontinental or submarine-launched ballistic missiles, that's ICBMs, or SLBMs, and would expect the same in reverse in accordance with the 1988 agreement between the U.S. and the USSR. That suggests there's at least some ongoing effort to not turn the suspension or enforcement into an immediate crisis. To understand why the suspension matters and what future there is for arms control, it helps to understand the agreement as it stands. What is New START? New START's an agreement between the U.S. and the Russian Federation, which carries a clunky formal name. The treaty between the U.S. and America and the Russian Federation on measures for the further reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms. The short form name, which is not really a true acronym, is instead a reference to START 1, or the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. It was in effect from 1991 to 2009, and which New START replaced in 2011. New START is set to expire in 2026 unless it's renewed by both countries. New START's the latest of a series of agreements limiting the overall size of the U.S. and Russian First Soviet nuclear arsenals, which at one point measured in the tens of thousands of warheads. Today, thanks largely to mutual disarmaments agreements and the limits outlined by New START, the U.S. and Russia have arsenals of roughly 5,400 and 6,000 warheads respectively. Of those, the U.S. is estimated to have 1,644 deployed strategic weapons, a term that means nuclear warheads on ICBMs or at heavy bomber bases, presumably ready to launch at a moment's notice. Russia is estimated to have around 1,588 deployed strategic weapons. As the START Department outlines, the treaty limits both countries to 700 total deployed ICBMs, SLBMs, and bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Bombers are counted under the treaty in the same way as a missile with one warhead, though nuclear-capable bombers like the B-52, B-2, and soon-to-be B-21 can carry multiple warheads. In addition, the treaty sets a limit of 1,550 nuclear warheads on deployed ICBMs, deployed SLBMs, and deployed heavy bombers equipped for nuclear armaments, as well as 800 deployed and non-deployed ICBM launchers, SLBM launchers, and heavy bombers equipped for nuclear armaments. In its follow-up statement to the suspension of New START, Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs clarified it would stick to the overall cap on warheads and launch systems as outlined in the treaty. What will change is the end of inspections. which have been central to the trust but verified structure of arms control agreements between the U.S. and Russia for decades. The terms of New START allow both countries to inspect deployed and non-deployed strategic systems like missiles or bombers up to 10 times a year, as well as non-deployed systems up to 8 times a year. These on-site inspections were halted in April 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and their resumption is the most likely act threatened by this change in posture. It's unclear yet if the suspension means the end of the treaty forever, though Putin taking such a step certainly doesn't bode well for its continued viability. Should New START formally end, some analysts fear it may usher in a new era of nuclear weapons productions and a rapid expansion of nuclear arsenals. While that remains a possibility, the hard limits of nuclear production, as well as decades of faded production expertise in both Russia and the U.S., means such a restart may be more intensive in time and in resources than immediately feared. Both nations have spent the last 30 years working on production of conventional forces. Ending an arms control treaty over nuclear weapons would be a gamble, suggesting nuclear weapons are the only tool that can provide security where conventional arms have failed. And here's Putin in his State of the Nation address.
Теперь еще несколько слов о том, что происходит вокруг нас. Уважаемые коллеги, остановлюсь еще на одной теме. В начале февраля этого года прозвучало заявление Североатлантического альянса с фактическим требованием к России, как они выражаются, вернуться к выполнению договора о стратегических наступательных вооружениях, включая допуск инспекций на наши ядерные оборонные объекты. Ну, даже не знаю, как это назвать. Это театр абсурда какой-то. Нам известно, что Запад прямо причастен к попыткам киевского режима нанести удары по базам нашей стратегической авиации. Использованные для этого беспилотники были оснащены и модернизированы при содействии натовских специалистов. И вот теперь они хотят еще и осматривать наши оборонные объекты. В современных условиях сегодняшнего противостояния это звучит как какой-то бред просто. При этом, обращая на это особое внимание, нам проводить полноценные инспекции в рамках этого договора не дают. Наши неоднократные заявки об осмотре тех или иных объектов остаются без ответа или отклоняются по формальным основаниям. И проверить толком мы ничего не можем на той стороне. Хочу подчеркнуть, США и НАТО прямо говорят о том, что их цель – нанести стратегическое поражение России. И что после этого они, как ни в чем не бывало, собираются разъезжать по нашим оборонным объектам, в том числе новейшим. Неделю назад, например, мною подписан указ о постановке на боевое дежурство новых стратегических комплексов наземного базирования. Они и туда собираются сунуть свой нос. И думают, что так просто. Мы их туда пускать будем просто так. Выпустив со своим коллективным заявлением, выступив со своим коллективным заявлением, НАТО фактически сделало заявку на то, чтобы стать участником договора о стратегических наступательных вооружениях. Ну, мы с этим согласны. Пожалуйста. Более того, считаем, что такая постановка вопроса давно назрела. Ведь в НАТО, напомню, состоит не одна ядерная держава, США. Ядерные арсеналы также есть и у Великобритании, и у Франции. Они совершенствуются, развиваются и тоже направлены против нас. Они же тоже направлены против России. Последние заявления их лидеров это только подтверждают. Послушайте. Не учитывать этого мы просто не можем, не имеем права. Особенно сегодня. Как и то, что первый договор о стратегических наступательных вооружениях изначально заключался Советским Союзом и Соединенными Штатами в 1991 году в принципиально другой ситуации, в условиях снижения напряженности и укрепления взаимного доверия. В дальнейшем наши отношения вышли на такой уровень, когда Россия и США заявили, что не считают больше друг друга противниками. Замечательно, все было очень хорошо. Действующий договор 2010 года содержит важнейшие положения о неделимости безопасности, о прямой взаимосвязи вопросов стратегических наступательных и оборонительных вооружений. Все это давно забыто. США вышли из договора ПАПРО, как известно. Все осталось в прошлом. Наши отношения, что очень важно, деградировали. И это целиком заслуга Соединенных Штатов. Именно они после распада Советского Союза приступили к пересмотру результатов Второй мировой войны, к строительству мира по-американски, в котором есть только один хозяин, один господин. Для этого стали грубо разрушать все основы мироустройства, заложенные после Второй мировой войны, чтобы перечеркнуть наследие и Ялты, и Потсдама. Шаг за шагом стали пересматривать сложившееся мироустройство, демонтировать систему безопасности и контроля над вооружениями. Спланировали и осуществили целую череду войн по всему миру. И все, повторю, с одной целью – сломать созданную после Второй мировой войны архитектуру международных отношений. Это не фигура речи. Вот так на практике в жизни все и происходит. После распада СССР навсегда стремятся зафиксировать свое глобальное доминирование, не считаясь с интересами современной России, да и с другими интересами тоже, других стран тоже. Конечно, ситуация в мире после 1945 года изменилась. Сформировались новые и быстро развиваются новые центры развития и влияния. Это естественный, объективный процесс, который нельзя игнорировать. Но недопустимым является то, что США стали перекраивать мироустройство именно только под себя, исключительно в своих собственных эгоистических интересах. Теперь через представителей НАТО подают сигналы, а по сути выдвигают ультиматум. Вы, Россия, выполняйте все, о чем договорились. В том числе договор об СНВ беспрекословно. А мы будем вести себя как заблагорассудится. Мол, нет никакой связи между проблематикой СНВ и, скажем, конфликтом на Украине, другими враждебными действиями Запада в отношении нашей страны. Как и нет громогласных заявлений, что они хотят нанести нам стратегическое поражение. Но это или верх лицемерия или цинизма, или верх глупости. Но идиотами их не назовешь, они все-таки не глупые люди. Нам стратегическое поражение хотят нанести и лезут на наши ядерные объекты. В этой связи вынужден заявить сегодня о том, что Россия приостанавливает свое участие в договоре о стратегических наступательных вооружениях. Повторю, не выходят из договора. Нет, а именно приостанавливает свое участие. Но прежде чем вернуться к обсуждению этого вопроса, мы должны для себя понять, на что все-таки претендуют такие страны Североатлантического альянса, как Франция и Великобритания. И как мы будем учитывать их стратегические арсеналы, то есть совокупный ударный потенциал альянса. Вот они сейчас своим заявлением сделали, по сути, заявку на участие в этом процессе. Ну, слава богу, давайте, мы не против. И не нужно только пытаться вновь всем врать, строить из себя поборников мира и разрядки. Мы же знаем всю подноготную, знаем, что истекают гарантийные сроки годности к боевому применению отдельных видов ядерных боеприпасов в Соединенных Штатах. И в этой связи некоторые деятели в Вашингтоне, нам это доподлинно известно, задумываются уже о возможности натуральных испытаний.
And here's another section of the speech regarding Ukraine and their history of Nazism.
Об устойчивом развитии, об экологии. Куда все делось? Куда все подевалось? При этом поток денег на войну не уменьшается. Также не жалеют средств на поощрение смут и переворотов в других странах, причем, опять же, по всему миру. На недавней конференции в Мюнхене звучали бесконечные обвинения в адрес России. Складывается впечатление, что это делалось лишь для того, чтобы все забыли, что натворил так называемый Запад за последние десятилетия. А это они выпустили джина из бутылки. Целые регионы погрузили в хаос. По оценкам самих американских экспертов, в результате войн, хочу обратить на это внимание, не мы придумали эти цифры, американцы сами дают. В результате войн, которые развязали США после 2001 года, погибло почти 900 тысяч человек. Более 38 миллионов стали беженцами. Все это они сейчас просто стереть из памяти человечества. Делают вид, что ничего не было. Но этого в мире никто не забыл и не забудет. С людскими жертвами и трагедиями никто из них не считается. Потому что на кону стоят, конечно, триллионы долларов. Возможность и дальше обкрадывать всех, прикрываясь словами о демократии и свободах, насаждать неолиберальные, тоталитарные по своему сути ценности. Навешивать ярлыки на целые страны и народы, публично оскорблять их лидеров. Подавлять инакомыслие в своих собственных странах, создавая образ врага, отвлекать внимание людей от коррупционных скандалов. С экранов ведь не сходит все это. Мы все это видим. От растущих внутренних экономических, социальных, межнациональных проблем и противоречий. Напомню, в 30-е годы прошлого века Запад фактически открыл нацистам путь к власти в Германии. А в наше время из Украины они стали делать антироссию. Проект на самом деле не новый. Люди, которые хоть немножко погружаются в историю, знают прекрасно. Этот проект уходит корнями еще в 19 век. Его взращивали и в Австро-Венгерской империи, и Польше, и другие страны с одной целью – оторвать эти исторические территории, которые сегодня называются Украиной, от нашей страны. Вот в чем эта цель. Ничего нового нет, никакой новизны. Все повторяют. Запад форсировал реализацию этого проекта сегодня, поддержав переворот 2014 года. Ведь переворот кровавый, антигосударственный, антиконституционный. Как будто ничего не произошло. Как будто так и надо. Сообщили даже, сколько денег на это истратили. В идеологическом...
So there it is, the recent 2014 coup orchestrated by the United States is something that, that's in our recent history. But Putin reminds us of the 30s and Ukraine and their connection to Austro-Hungarianism and Nazism. Here's some history on that. The History of Fascism in Ukraine, Part 2, the OUN during World War II, 1941 to 45. The History of Fascism. The Organization of Ukraine, or Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN, is the most successful post-war fascist group. During the war, the OUN played a major role in helping the Germans carry out the Holocaust, which claimed 1.2 million Jewish lives. They also attempted genocide against the Polish population in Volhynia and Galicia, in what's today Western Ukraine. These mass murders were carried out in the most brutal manner imaginable. I won't go into that detail. Ukraine's current Jewish president Zelensky, whose family were victims of the mass murder in Ukraine, said of Stepan Bandera, "He is a hero for a certain percentage of Ukrainians, and it's normal and it's cool. Ukrainian history has been falsified to portray the OUN as heroes, as the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalism, as heroes who battle both the Nazis and the Soviets. Yet it's not only in the madhouse that it's post-made in Ukraine that the history of Ukraine has been falsified. Because of the close ties to the OUN, to the American, British, German, Polish, and other governments, the OUN have also been able to make their twisted mythology into the accepted mainstream version of events. The OUN were considered too valuable by the CIA and other intelligence agencies to have their wartime crimes exposed. Equally important, the OUN became a major source for anti-Soviet propaganda, which then became mainstream history. During the Cold War, academia became a major weapon in the battle between capitalism and communism. Today, nothing's changed, and the new Cold War with Russia-Ukraine is currently the most important battleground. Shielding Western publics from the truth about the insanity and cruelty of the Ukrainian fascists the West are supporting is the main goal of the media and academia when it comes to Ukraine. Ukraine is only the most extreme example of the memory wars being waged across the former Soviet Union and the former Warsaw Pact countries of Eastern Europe, where pro-Western governments seek to turn Nazi collaborators into heroes, demonize the Soviet Union, and destroy all monuments to the role of the Soviet Union played in defeating fascism. I'll be relying mainly on the brilliant work Stepan Bandera, The Life and Afterlife of a Ukrainian Nationalist Fascism, Genocide and Cult, by Grzegorz Rosalinsky-Lieb, the first critical and scholarly account of the history of the OUN. Ironically, his book was released just before the start of the 2014 Civil War, and Ukrainian nationalists did everything they could to prevent the book from being published, waging a public campaign against the author. And so in part one of the series is described the origins of Ukrainian nationalism and its transformation into a fascist movement. It's also explained how present-day Ukraine had long been divided, with central and eastern Ukraine controlled by Russia. Western Ukraine, which was originally part of Poland, became part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire when Poland was dismembered in the 18th century. After World War I, it became a part of a reborn Poland known as the Second Republic, which had absorbed the short-lived Republic of Western Ukraine. I traced the origins of the OUN and its terrorist campaign with Poland. The OUN engaged in its assassination, massacres, arson, and other crimes. This landed the leader of the OUN's homeland executive, Stepan Bandera, in prison, although his 2 trials made him famous. The OUN was controlled by its leaders in exile. After Stepan Bandera escaped from prison thanks to the German invasion of Poland in September 1939, he tried to seize the leadership of the OUN. This led the organization to split into an OUNM, answering to Andrea Melnik, and OUNB, answering to Bandera. During the brief 2-week window after the German invasion of Poland, but prior to the Soviet invasion, the OUN massacred thousands of Jews and also murdered many of the defeated Polish army who were trying to escape or return home. The OUN leaders then headed for Western Poland. Eastern Poland became Western Ukraine. Once the Soviets arrived, they reunified Ukraine and cracked down hard on Polish nationalists as well as on the OUN. I'm going to push back on this term, crack down. I'd like to, come up with an alternative, more distinct, more direct term. The exiled OUN leaders in German-occupied Poland, known as the General Government, along with tens of thousands of their supporters who fled the Soviets, were busy working closely with the Germans, who had been their sponsors for decades, to plan the invasion of the Soviet Union. Stepan Bandera and the other OUNB leaders wrote down their plans in the months before the German invasion of the Soviet Union. It was known as the Struggles and Activities Plan. It called for the OUNB to activate its networks to give a welcome to the Nazis and form militias for eliminating Jews, Poles, and all non-Ukrainians, as well as any Ukrainians who oppose the OUN. The OUNB came up with a bunch of fascist, anti-communist, and anti-Semitic slogans with which to blanket the country. The OUNB and OUNM were both working closely with the Abwehr, German military intelligence, who provided military training, police training, and political training. 800 OUNB members joined special task forces who were to follow the Wehrmacht into the Soviet Union and mobilize Ukrainians to support their planned Nazi puppet government. 800 other OUNB members joined the Nachtigall Battalion, which was controlled by the Abwehr. The OUNB also had a network of 20,000 active members in Soviet Western Ukraine, along with 1.5 million supporters that could be mobilized. The OUNB planned to declare an independent Ukrainian state with Stepan Bandera as its providnik or fascist dictator. Hitler, however, had other plans for Ukraine. Hitler viewed Ukrainians as subhuman Slavs like the Russians, who would have to be massacred or enslaved to make way for German settlers. Ukraine's rich black soil would feed the German Reich. Hitler thought Ukraine would be for Germany what India was for the British or America was for the U.S., who wiped out the Native Americans. The OUN did have a major Nazi ally in the form of Alfred Rosenberg, Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories. Rosenberg saw the potential of an OUN-controlled Ukraine as a valuable ally. This was the situation on the eve of Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, which began on 22 June 1941. The war would lead to the death of 27 million people in the Soviet Union, 5.2 million civilians would die in Ukraine, 2.3 million Ukrainians would be deported to German slave labor camps, 2.7 million Jews, 1.6 million would be killed. 700 cities and towns were destroyed in Ukraine, along with 28,000 villages. The impact of the OUN on the success of the Nazi plans to exterminate Jewish people was dramatic. In areas that had been long subjected to OUN propaganda to Western Ukraine, local Jews had much less chance of survival. In Ternopil in Western Ukraine, 97% of them were killed. In contrast, in Kharkov in Eastern Ukraine, 91% of them survived. The OUNB has been warned in advance of the invasion date and has smuggled the struggles and activity plan into Ukraine with its blueprint for the coming genocide. OUN activity spread out across the countryside, settling up militias and local governments on 25 June 1941. On 25 June 1941, the OUNB tried to stage an uprising in Lvov, but it was crushed by the Soviets. Sometimes the OUNB forces would attack the retreating Red Army. However, they usually waited until the Red Army retreated before entering an area. On 30 June 1941, the Wehrmacht entered the city, including the Ukrainian Noctigal Battalion, whom locals greeted with flowers, calling the Stepan Bandera Battalion. The Noctigal Battalion seized control of the radio station and began broadcasting Nazi and OUN propaganda. That morning, the Germans in the OUN discovered that the Soviet secret police, the NKVD, had massacred its political prisoners when the German invasion began to prevent them from collaborating with the Germans. Many were doubtless OUN members killed before they could carry out horrific crimes, and this happened in a number of areas and was used by the OUN to scapegoat the Jewish population for the killings. They were falsely accused of being NKVD informants and blamed for the victims' death. This would be the pattern across Western Ukraine, where there had been no recent executions. Those executed in the terror years earlier were dug up to inflame the masses. Thus, already on the 30th June 1941, small-scale massacres of Jews of Lvov began. That night at 8 p.m., Yaroslav Stetsko had held a ceremony in which he declared a new Ukrainian state under the leadership of Stepan Bandera. Here's Revenge of the Cis on Russia. Actually, this is particularly on Russia removing themselves from the arms treaty as well.
Does he have subtitles? I understand him perfectly.
Possible concern that the Chinese could, in the future, start helping Russia with lethal aid. How big of a concern is that right now?
Oh, I guess the mic is fucking up.
Yeah, because it's picking up the, yeah.
We do have concerns that China is considering providing military assistance to Russia.
How dare they? Whoa!
They're not even involved in this. It's almost like, can you imagine a mega power getting involved in a dispute that doesn't affect
world
them?
power.
Can you imagine?
Nuclear. It's pronounced nuclear.
Can you imagine how crazy that would be?
That would be nuts.
Who would do that? That's a red line that we don't cross. Not here.
I got some bad news.
What's that?
Turns out that's a red line that we do cross.
Oh, okay. Well, then I apologize.
Oh, name a dozen times.
I could name 24.
I know.
we need another Vietnam to thin out their ranks a bit.
We saw
no,
Russia
that's
and
2 dozen.
China announce a no-holds partnership about a year ago, and obviously have concerns about China continuing to bolster Russia as they're continuing to prosecute this war.
And I heard that Coca-Cola will be moving all their processing plants to China. So all our Coke will have PP in it now, and we are fucked.
No.
Great.
Yeah.
Can we just get it from Mexico? We get the sugar instead.
I mean, yeah, but I've never tasted Mexican pea. But if it's better as sugar, I guess it's fine. I don't know.
The U.S. price tag for helping Ukraine battle Russia so far, $113 billion.
I looked it up. Now, Germany, which is actually the biggest ally that's closest to them, how much money do you think Germany's given them? I looked it up. I already know the answer.
$38.
Oh, no, more than, perhaps more than that.
10 million. Something small.
It's 10 billion.
Oh,
and we've given them $113 billion.
I'm shocked that it's a 10-1, really, to be honest.
Actually,
it's usually 0-1.
But then somebody did the math, like country per capita, how much like they give. Germany's number 9 on the list versus how big they are versus how much they've given. And it's also, I love that it's just implied that you got to give or the whole thing goes dark.
You got to give. You got to
give.
That number could grow exponentially if Russia winds up helping China. If Russia winds up getting that Chinese help, and if Putin starts carrying out nuclear tests now that he is suspending the U.S.-Russia New START nuclear treaty.
Oh, cool.
What's important is that our relations have degraded. The responsibility for that is fully.
Guess how much we paid? Guess how much we spent on World War II?
I mean, I don't know. Tell me, how much did we spend?
We spent 296 billion.
Oh, okay.
During World War II, to actually fight 2 fronts in the Pacific and in Europe,
and drop 2 nukes.
And drop 2 nukes while funding naval efforts across the entire fucking world for 5 years. That was 296 billion. We're already at 113 billion.
But I understand. But here's the difference. Winston Churchill didn't need to buy a new beach home in Miami like fucking Zelensky did.
Yeah.
You moron.
Yeah, thanks, Virgie, for the reminder that things were better in the good old days. We know. Back in my day, we could commit a war crime for just $20 billion, and then you'd also get to see a little tiny news reel in the middle. You get to see a cartoon and a newsreel.
Oh,
and the popcorn was only a nickel.
The Vietnam War cost us 111 billion.
And we lost.
And we
Well, don't worry. We're going to lose this one, too. It's great. We'll be fine. It's going to be all right.
We don't win wars. This is the U.S.
We start them, facilitate them, fund them, and then back away slowly.
It's basically like when Jim Cramer says something's a buy. When America declares war on it, that thing has already won.
Yeah, it's
drugs, fucking failing education system, fucking all that shit.
Poverty.
Yeah,
poverty.
Terrorism.
Terror won.
We're not good at this.
We're not great.
No.
We should stop declaring war on things.
Yeah, that's a good point. We really
almost
should.
Like U.S. English mixes the word war and concession.
Can we please?
Me fail English? That's impossible.
United States.
Can we declare a war on white people so white people could win again?
They can't be silly people. They want to deliver us a strategic defeat while crawling into our strategic nuclear objectives. Regarding this, I have to say that Russia suspends its participation in the New START treaty.
We are getting closer and closer to fucking just Armageddon, and all of this because I don't care what the fuck you stupid assholes say. All of this because Biden owes Ukraine a favor for getting his crackhead kid a job. Cool. Jesus Christ, we didn't even get to kill the fucking Duke or anything this time. It was just fucking a crackhead with a laptop.
That's all.
That's what started World War III. A crackhead with a laptop.
Yeah, we saw the movie, Royce. We all riffed it.
Yeah, it was so bad, that movie. My son Hunter.
And a few minutes ago, the Secretary of State Tony Blinken is saying that Russia pulling out a New START is a new problem for the West.
The announcement. No, I said, hey, Blinken.
Is deeply unfortunate.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I got to go play the bass.
Is he a bassist? There's a good bassist guy.
Is he? Wait, he plays or the guitar maybe? No, it might be the bass. I think it's the bass.
And we have Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg.
Regret today's decision by Russia to suspend its participation in the New START treaty. Over the last years, Russia has violated and walked away from key arms control agreements. With today's decision on New START, the whole arms control architecture has been dismantled. I strongly encourage Russia to reconsider its decision and to respect existing agreements. More nuclear weapons and less arms control makes the world more dangerous. And that's the reason why in NATO we have worked so hard to engage Russia on issues related to arms control, and why NATO allies have supported the New START. And also why I'm calling on Russia today to reconsider its decision to suspend its participation in the New START agreement.
And from Al Jazeera, 10 times countries decided to exit international agreements. With Russia suspending its participation in the New START Treaty on nuclear arms, we look at other examples of countries changing their minds. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced on Tuesday that Russia would suspend participation in the New START Treaty, the last central pillar of post-Cold War nuclear arms control between Moscow and Washington, which limits their strategic nuclear arsenals. Signed in 2010, the New START Treaty caps the number of strategic nuclear warheads that the U.S. and Russia may deploy, and the deployment of landed submarine-based missiles and bombs to deliver them. Here are some other recent examples of international powers deciding to step away from important agreements. November 2016, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree to withdraw Russia from the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which prosecutes war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. October 27, Burundi became the first country to withdraw from the ICC amid accusations that the court focuses too much on the African continent. U.S. President in 2018, Donald Trump, announced that the U.S. was effectively withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, defying last-ditch diplomatic efforts by his European allies to convince him otherwise. October 2018, the U.S. terminated the Treaty of Amity reached in 1976 with Iran, which was supposed to facilitate commercial relationships, tax structures, and access to each nation's court systems. I noticed 1979 was the revolution in Iran as well. It may have facilitated that. August 2019, the U.S. formally withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, a landmark arms control agreement with Russia claiming it undermined U.S. national security interests. In 1987, it was the U.S. and Soviet Union leaders Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed the INF Treaty, which required both countries to eliminate land-based nuclear ballistic and cruise missiles with a range of 500 kilometers to 5,500 kilometers. The treaty's expiration now enables the U.S. to resume the development of its medium-range land-based arsenal. In May 2020, Trump decided to withdraw the U.S. from the 92 Open Skies Treaty, which authorized countries to fly over each other's territory to conduct unarmed observation flights. November 2020, the U.S. formally exited the Paris Agreement, fulfilling Trump's old promise to withdraw the world's second-largest greenhouse gas emitter from the global pact to fight climate change. In 2021, with a presidential decree published in the Official Gazette on March 20th, Turkey pulled out of the Council of Europeans Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence in a sudden but not unexpected move. In February 2022, Russia also withdrew from the Open Skies Treaty. On November 18th, following in the footsteps of Poland 2022, Poland, Spain, Netherlands, France, Slovenia, and Germany, Luxembourg, the seventh country to announce plans to withdraw from the Energy Charter Treaty, the ECT, on international cooperation in the energy sector. That was November 2022. And from CGTN, U.S.-Russia should resume implementation of New START treaty, the UN chief says. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Tuesday called on the U.S. and Russia to resume the full implementation of the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the New START. Asked about Guterres' reaction to Russian President Vladimir Putin's announcement that his country will suspend its participation in the New START nuclear arms reduction treaty, spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric said the Secretary General's position is that the U.S. and Russia should resume the full implementation of the treaty without delay. The New START and successive bilateral treaties on strategic nuclear arms reduction between the two countries have provided security not only for Russia and the U.S. but also for the entire international community, said Dujarric. A world without nuclear arms control is far more dangerous and unstable one without potentially catastrophic consequences. Every effort should be taken to avoid this outcome, including through an immediate return to dialogue, he told a daily press briefing. Asked whether Guterres has plans to talk to Putin on the issue of the New START or the conflict in Ukraine, Dujarric said he had nothing to share at that point. Putin made the announcement while delivering his State of the Union address, noting that certain figures in Washington are considering nuclear weapon tests to develop new types of nuclear weapons. Putin said in this situation, the Russian Defense Ministry and Rosatom, Russia's state atomic energy corporation, must ensure readiness for testing Russian nuclear weapons. Of course, we'll not be the first to do this, but if the U.S. conducts a test, then we will, Putin said. The New START, the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty enforced between the two nuclear superpowers, can be extended by a maximum of 5 years with the consent of the two countries. Russia and the U.S. officially extended the treaty by 5 years on February 3, 2021. And watch this space.
Watch this space.
We'll be back with more world news. Xi Jinping to visit Moscow for summit with Putin. Top diplomat Wang Yi, who is currently in Moscow, has said ties between the two countries are rock solid. Chinese leader Xi Jinping is preparing to visit Moscow for a summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the coming months, according to the Wall Street Journal. Citing people familiar with the plan, the newspaper said on Tuesday that Xi-Putin summit was part of a Chinese effort to play a more active role in bringing the year-old war to an end and part of a push for multi-party peace talks. China will also use the summit to reiterate calls that nuclear weapons should not be used, the report added. And from weeklyblitz.net, peace tour, what Wang Yi came to Russia with. After a week of traveling around European countries, Wang Yi, head of the Office of the Foreign Affairs Commission of the CPC Central Committee, landed in Moscow. Formerly, his visit was a preparation for the expected visit to Russia in the spring of Chinese President Xi Jinping. However, the most burning topic of Wang Yi's meetings with the Russian politicians and earlier with European and Kiev diplomats was the plan for a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian conflict announced by Beijing. At the same time, the pacifist drive of Chinese diplomacy is largely associated with the desire to dampen European criticisms of Russia's support, while not distancing itself from ties with Moscow, experts believe, calling for peace and handing out knives. Formerly, the visit of Wang Yi, head of the Chancellery of the Commission of the CPC Central Committee of Foreign Affairs, to Moscow, was considered a preparatory stage for the spring visit to Russia by Chinese President Xi Jinping, which, by the way, Chinese side has not yet ironically confirmed. However, for the vast majority of the expert community, it turned out to be of interest to others. In what vein the main Chinese diplomat will speak on the Ukrainian topic. The conflict, which has been setting the tone for all world politics for the past years, has somehow already become one of the central subjects at Wang Yi's meetings in a number of European capitals prior to his arrival in Moscow. Recall that before Russia, the chief Chinese diplomat managed to visit France, Italy, Hungary, and at the International Security Conference in Munich. In Germany, by the way, he held a bilateral meeting with the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, Dmitry Kuleba, whom he assured China is always on the side of peace and dialogue, insists on peace negotiations, and doesn't want the crisis to drag and to escalate. In turn, the Ukrainian minister, according to Xinhua news agency, noted that Kiev attaches great importance to China's position on the political settlement of the Ukrainian issue and hopes that Beijing will continue to play a constructive role in resolving it. Head of the Office of the Foreign Affairs Commission of the CPC Central Committee, Wang Yi, and Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba during a bilateral meeting at the International Security Conference in Munich. There was a picture there. And by the way, the fact that Kiev doesn't hold a grudge against Beijing like the United States and many in the West is indirectly evidenced by rather cautious statements on this subject by the Ukrainian leader. In particular, in a recent interview with German Welt, Volodymyr Zelensky noted that Ukraine would like to see China as an ally. The president also said, if China would enter into an alliance with Russia, there would be a world war, and I think China is aware of this. I presume this is Wang Yi meeting Nikolai Patrushev in Moscow.
China and Russia have agreed to continue to step up cooperation within multilateral frameworks and do more to improve global governance. The consensus was reached during a meeting in Moscow between China's senior diplomat Wang Yi and Nikolai Patrushev, Russia's Secretary of Security Council. The two expressed their willingness to jointly practice true multilateralism, oppose all forms of unilateral bullying, and promote democracy in international relations. They say peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region should be firmly maintained. They opposed the introduction of a Cold War mentality. Also on the agenda was the Ukraine issue. Wang and Patrushev are leading the mechanism of the strategic security consultation between the two countries.
Watch this space.
Watch this space, and remember, your engagement through a like, a share, and a subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards our mission and the continuation thereof, to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.